Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Ginny. Thank you, Jolly Logic. I've never been more humbled or flattered in my life. That was quite amazing. And again, thank you all for being here. I spoke with Ginny a few days ago and suggested I might come up here with my projector and laptop and screen and do a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation on this dreary, rainy afternoon and put you all to sleep. But instead, we'll try to make this more engaging and more enjoyable for everyone. And it tends to be more enjoyable and engaging if we focus on your questions and you get out of me what you want to get out of me. And that also helps me understand better what you're concerned about and what the 11th District is concerned about. I was in Shippensburg yesterday in a small in-home event, and a wise man, Dr. Bill Freeman, who's been a mover and shaker in the Cumberland County Democratic Party for decades now, comes up to me before I spoke and he said, Alan, you've probably heard this before, but I want to stress this. It's not enough for Democrats to just talk about Donald Trump. You need to talk about what you're for. I said, I understand that, Bill. I've been tracking that for months now. And so in a little bit, I'm going to talk to you about the Strong Communities, Strong Nation economic platform that I'm running on up and down the length of the 11th District. But first, I'm going to talk about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things you can say about Donald Trump, of course. As you heard, I'm a veteran, so I'm going to focus on just one issue, and then I'm going to make a little suggestion after that. And please, if you've got issues with Donald Trump, I encourage you to talk about them at length. And here's a good reason why. I watched a headline scroll past on the television news this morning before I left that said that 71% of Republican-leaning voters and Republican voters want their Republican elected officials to confront Donald Trump when they think he is wrong. This is the beginning of the end right here. This is when the Republicans start fleeing their president and move back to good governance and good order and humane actions, really, from our government. So you're probably not unaware that a few weeks ago, Donald Trump started attacking the pregnant widow of a Green Beret.
Yeah. Disgusting.
He spent 8 days doing this, 8 uninterrupted days doing this. He enlisted his chief of staff in this. He enlisted his press secretary in this. And of course, as you possibly also know, this is not the first time that Donald Trump has attacked a non-white Gold Star family. Okay. Donald Trump insulted Senator John McCain and every American POW on July 18th, 2015, when he said, quote, "I like people who weren't captured." Oh, yeah. He sat in a room filled with veterans and suggested that people who were suffering from post-traumatic stress maybe weren't strong enough to be in the military. I've got to tell you, that's pretty hard for me to take from a serial draft dodger who can't say a single bad word about Vladimir Putin. So I promise you this. If Donald Trump hasn't been impeached by the time you send me to Washington, when I get in Washington, impeaching Donald Trump will be my first task. There are 100 other reasons why he needs to be impeached. You know most of them. Go out there and talk about those, please. Now, in deference to Dr. Bill Freeman and Democratic advocates everywhere, advisors everywhere, let's talk about strong communities, strong nation. You all are quite familiar with the Great Recession. I hope all of you have recovered. We know that the nation has recovered. But when we talk about the national recovery from the Great Recession, we're talking about an aggregate. We're talking about national averages. We're not talking about individual communities. We know up and down the length of the 11th District, east to west across Pennsylvania and all across the country, there are small communities that not only haven't recovered, some of them haven't begun to recover, some of them are continuing to suffer and go downhill. In fact, greater and greater recession and greater depression in some areas. So while what we did to get the national economy up on its feet and get the economy growing, to get jobs for people. We've recovered over 8 million jobs, for example. That's all good, but it's not enough. It's time for national objectives, national focus to shift to local communities. Now, key to that is the relationship between supply and demand. I think probably everyone in this room understands supply and demand, and you might wonder when you watch Republican policies coming out, what sort of supply and demand model are they focusing on? And I'll tell you, Energy Secretary Rick Perry explained that to us not so long ago. Right? He said, let me give you an economics lesson, supply and demand. If you provide the supply, the demand will follow. I wish that was true. We all wish that was true, right? Every one of us would be successful business owners if that's the way it actually worked. But what Rick Perry is actually explaining is how all businesses fail. You provide goods or services and there is not demand, and so that's it, you're done. Without the demand, you're nothing. 70% of our national economy is consumer demand. That's not wanting something, that's not needing something, that's having a want and a need and the money to get that, okay? There are lots and lots of things that we can do to help local communities generate demand, whether that's support for unions, support for minimum wage increases, support for a variety of federal programs like community development block grants that can help a facility like this, or help towns who don't have a facility like this gain one. Chesapeake Bay restoration funds, for example. The Appalachian Regional Commission's plans that provide money to help overcome the losses from reduction in coal industry, for example. And of course, there's infrastructure, right? You've heard Republicans and Democrats both say that if we spend money on infrastructure, then we get jobs. Very true, 100% true. They leave out a whole bunch of intermediate steps and a whole bunch of intermediate players, but if you do spend money on infrastructure, invariably you're going to get jobs. We don't have the president's $1 trillion infrastructure plan. Lou Barletta sits on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We don't have Lou Barletta's infrastructure plan. We don't have a national infrastructure plan, period. Meanwhile, the president's budget defunded Chesapeake Bay restoration, defunded community development block grants, defunded Appalachian Regional Commission. And you know what? You know what you get if you fund those programs? The same thing you get when you fund infrastructure spending. You get jobs. It's the same players, the same intermediate steps. If you plow money into those programs, you get jobs. There are people working on environmental positions right now, working in offices and working in jobs and environment, that if they really do cancel the funding on Chesapeake Bay restoration, they're going to lose their jobs. So the whole notion of strong communities, strong nation is get money into local communities, get money into workers' pockets, into retirees' pockets, increase minimum wage again, support for unions, et cetera, so you can generate demand, attract businesses, create jobs. It's the antithesis of what the Republicans are doing. Trickle-down economics is we squeeze that money out to nothing, demand dries up, businesses fade, jobs blow away like dust in the wind. Okay? So that's what we're after. There are 1,000 questions attached to that, and it's time to get to those questions or any others that you have. So who's first? There's always the first person. I didn't seed this crowd, as you can tell, with questioners, so.
I have
Yes, sir.
a question, a geographic question about the 11th district.
Sure.
So it sounds like a very deep swath. Does it go kind of north to south?
It runs from south central Pennsylvania, where I'm at, one county away from Maryland, and runs towards the northeast, one county shy of New York, and one county shy of New Jersey. There are 9 counties in total. 3 are completely within the district. That's Wyoming, Columbia, and Montour. And the 6 counties are partially within the district. Luzerne, Carbon, Northumberland, Perry, Cumberland, where I'm at, and Dauphin County. Dauphin County has 3 congressional districts carved out of their county. So.
How long has it been since there was a logical?
Well, it hasn't been this bad. Lou Barletta won in 2010. That was a census year. They redistricted after the census. So when he ran for re-election, this was the district. The district he won was up around Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, and that area. And that was great because the people in that district can meet with each other. They can organize and communicate together. With this district here, I'll tell you, I drive the length of it repeatedly, but I don't see a lot of people from Wyoming County driving down to Cumberland County to discuss strategy, for example.
But didn't it gradually evolve evolve to that, or was it one fell swoop?
You can see them changing over time, but 2010 is when things really, really, really changed. Bizarre is a very good term for it. The 7th District around Pennsylvania is the poster child for redistricting. And this wasn't done to help any of you. It was absolutely not done to help any of you. Belinda, sorry.
How would you like to see the redistricting run?
Voters should be in charge of redistricting.
I'm sorry.
Period. Voters should be in charge of redistricting. Political parties should be completely out of it.
So, but then how do we do that?
Well, I encourage you to look at what they're doing in Iowa. In Iowa, they have some chart experts and economists who are doing it all themselves in a room, locked out, no politically influenced people enter their room, enter their workspace at all, and then that goes up for review. And Fair Districts PA continues to promote the film that demonstrates that, and they're working through a kind of a lengthy process to turn this over to citizens. I think, honestly, a court case is probably our best case, or best course to get this
Is
fixed.
that something that the constituency can do?
Join Fair Districts PA for starters. Write to your members of in the General Assembly. There are bills that.
They're mostly Republicans, so they're not going to want to run it.
Well, there are some Republicans that are signing up for the Fair Districts PA bill that they've sponsored. Not many, but there are some.
In Pennsylvania?
Yeah, in Pennsylvania. And Fair Districts PA, to their credit, is helping this by pointing to Maryland, where Democrats have done the same thing. And so when, tell your Republican friends, tell your Republican representatives in the General Assembly that there's a backlash coming someday, and you want to protect yourself from that backlash. I'll say this, too. When we turn the 11th District, and if you've seen the shape of the district, it's kind of a wedge that starts small in south central Pennsylvania and gets broader as it goes up to the northeast. When we turn the 11th District into a blue stake in the red Republican heart of Pennsylvania, Republicans are going to be all for redistricting because they're going to want to contain that threat. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm all for impeachment of Trump. However, are we going to be better in the fence? He scares me.
Well, yeah, and Pence should scare you. And if Pence doesn't scare every woman in this room, please familiarize yourself with Mike Pence. There's something worse than Mike Pence in the White House. It's Donald Trump and Mike Pence in the White House. Okay? So, yeah, but we can't get to Mike Pence, and we can't deal with his policies. But what he is doing is, Pence is very active right now, but he's active behind this clown show that's going on with Donald Trump. So, yeah, we would expose him to light if we moved him into the Oval Office. Jerry?
There's a lot of activity going on in the Northern Columbia region in terms of pipeline construction, and there have been fracking. What's your thought on environmental issues and the proposal for policy?
So thank you. Let me start by saying that someone in Luzerne County who I'd spoken to months before said in a group setting like this, Alan Howe's not good for the environment because he's not pro-nuclear. And I had a hard time with that non sequitur there. Let me tell you, I'm good for the environment. I'm also rational for the environment and rational for the economy as well. I'm very dismayed by the environmental damage that is attendant with the natural gas fracking and pipelines that are going on through Pennsylvania, because a lot of that is unnecessary. We can do this a lot more cleanly than we're doing it right now. We can do this with a lot more oversight, but as you know, the DEP has been vastly underfunded. We're talking about state issues now, but vastly underfunded. They don't supervise things the way they need to. They don't do water quality checks the way they need to, et cetera. We can do that much better. My concern is that the more we slow down the natural gas market, the longer we have coal. And if there's anything worse than natural gas, it's coal. If you compare methane emissions from natural gas and compare just the carbon dioxide that comes from coal combustion, then you start to come maybe something close to parity. But all you get from methane and from natural gas combustion is CO2 and water. On the coal side, you've got arsenic and mercury and a whole host of other pollutants, fly ash, et cetera, that are huge problems as well. And we're dealing with abandoned coal mine damage all across the northern part of the state. what we can do, what the government really must do, is accelerate what we're doing with solar and wind and wave energy, and just obviate all of these fossil fuels, and not listen to, here we go with Rick Perry again, Rick Perry saying that fossil fuels prevent rape, which is, good grief, no. Yeah, no kidding. Rick Perry's, yeah. Mind you, I'm not defending Rick Perry. Rick Perry says that, you know, if we're burning fossil fuels and creating electricity, more light will mean less sexual assault and rape, etc. That's his argument. This is the guy who has problems with supply and demand. Denny?
Alan, it appears that the Republican Party right now is cratering, particularly the result of everything within the organization that Trump put together. But we as Democrats have our issues, and those that maybe you know more than we do, but what we hear off of our news broadcasts, what are we going to do to bring us into a nucleus that we can really be powerful in 2018 and beyond?
I've told people since I started to run, and I consider this at the very beginning of the year, we're the only campaign that said we'll fight for the 11th district against Lou Barletta when he said he was going to defend the seat. I've told people from the beginning that I am not an adjective Democrat. I have the question right off, are you a liberal Democrat? Are you a centrist Democrat? Are you a progressive Democrat? I'm a Democrat, they're Republicans, we're Democrats, they're Republicans, we're Democrats, they're Republicans. That's the distinction you have to remember. We don't all have to agree on everything. We have to fit on our end of the spectrum, from the center to the extreme left, and they fit on their end, which is just the extreme right. So that's the distinction that matters. For this, what's going on right now with Donna Brazile, with the Sanders supporters versus Clinton supporters, I'm sorry, you've taken your eye off the ball. That's not what matters. What matters is what's happening in the White House and in the Congress. That's what is affecting you every day. Just stop the bickering, forget about it. There are bigger dragons to slay here. Yes, ma'am.
How could you make solar heat less expensive than drilling and everything else? I would say that most of us can't afford solar heat now.
Yeah, well, true. Without subsidies, et cetera, for a private person to do an installation, that's absolutely correct. But you can also do large-scale installations and of both wind and solar. And the per kilowatt price of this has come down. Now, we have a challenge to that right now in that U.S. manufacturers of solar panels have got a World Trade Organization injunction against Chinese solar panels coming on. They say they're being dumped on the market. So the cost of the panels are going to go up. The cost per kilowatt is going to go up. But we did subsidize those installations. We can subsidize those installations so it is cheap for you. So it is affordable for you.
That's right.
Yeah. Well,
One panel, you can't use one panel, and
Right.
one panel
Right.
is cheap. It's $15,000.
and mind who's in the state government here in Pennsylvania and who's in the national government right now, we need a change of leadership, both at the state and national level, to get some of that money going. But we also you have to start with concern about climate change, and it's impossible, really, to get Republicans to get serious about climate change, although we did have quite an amazing thing this week where, I don't know if you want to attribute to incompetence in the White House or what, but they released a climate change report that contradicted everything that Donald Trump has been saying. So it turns out it's not a Chinese hoax. We have several steps. We have several steps to go to get to that point, but we must get to that point. That's really, I've had people complain driving up and down I-81. I go to Hazleton all the time, of course, and I see this long line of windmills. And look at those windmills, they look terrible. Well, okay, before the windmills, during coal, you couldn't see the mountain at all. Now you can see it, and you can see that mountain over there that has no windmills in it. Enjoy that mountain and enjoy that clean air.
I was born by a mountain that was completely gone. Nothing could grow but white birch. And I'm not telling you how old I am.
I'm not going to ask.
But it's still the same
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Nothing grows on it. What happens to all of that? there is no trees that will take that carbon dioxide and stop the water and the heat and everything else.
And this is why Chesapeake Bay restoration programs need to be fully funded.
Everything went down the Chesapeake Bay from those mountains.
This is why Appalachian Regional Commission projects need to be fully funded so that communities can do those restorations. We're missing mountains in West Virginia, right? Whole mountains were removed for coal. So yeah, there are windmills.
Well,
Windmills are
out here,
okay.
The mountains,
Yeah.
the holes were filled with all the railroad cars and all the junk.
Yeah.
They put all the railroad cars down in those holes.
And in the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton area, they filled them with water out of the Susquehanna River because they breached the bottom of the river and it filled the mines up. Yeah. And again, just put this in scale. Extractive industries in the 11th Congressional District employ about 1,400 people. That's oil, gas, and coal, about 1,400 people. Healthcare and human and social services, which is the largest employment sector in the 11th District, employs about 48,000 people. So when they start tearing down the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, then we're going to start losing jobs. But you're absolutely right, ma'am. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. It's an iterative process. We have to turn the state in the right direction. Yes, sir.
On that solar deal, PP&L right now is working with a company down in the Lehigh Valley. And I just had a nephew do this. He signed up for that. He no longer has an electric bill. He didn't have any money involved in the solar panels, not a nickel.
PPL put them in?
They are looking for locations to put the solar panels on.
Yep.
He has 20 years guaranteed, no electric bill, nothing. And in 20 years, he owns the panels. But the key there is the amount of panels that are up there. They're giving him his electric, but they're selling excess back to PP&L, and it's a win-win. And they're covering barns down there and south exposure homes. And it's a matter of getting a hold of PP&L and, hey, we hear about this, why not here?
Yeah. The market's shifting dramatically. It would not take much of a nudge from the federal government or state governments to really accelerate this. And if you like to drink water or you like to breathe air, these are good things for you. I mean, that's... Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know your stance on abortion. Are you pro-life or pro-choice?
Thank you for that. Every politician wants to answer that question in public with a camera running, and you deserve an answer, and everybody does. Thank you. I've spent all my life working on the issues of equality and freedom, defending people's rights, et cetera, and I'd much rather work on that than tell any woman, that she doesn't have the same right to make her healthcare decisions with her doctor that a man has. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. There are a whole bunch of topics we haven't touched. Yes?
I feel the biggest threat to our country right now is the deficit in our debt. I shouldn't say, other than the present administration, the biggest threat is the debt and the deficit. And you've talked a lot about spending, but my concern is the opposite side.
The revenue.
Well, balancing.
Okay.
The government's been spending more money than they've taken in for years.
Right.
And I don't want my grandchildren paying for me. And that's where we're at.
Yep, and I'm with you. And I'm not going to tell you that we're going to soak the rich, but let me talk to you about two tax proposals that you'll find on my website. That's Howe for PA11.org, HOWEFOR PA11.org. The first, we'll start with payroll taxes, then we'll go to income taxes, if that's all right. How many of, not all of you in this room, but how many of you pay payroll taxes or remember paying payroll taxes? 6.2% of your income, unless it used to be you made more than $118,500. Now, if you make more than $127,200 a year, you pay 6.2% on every dollar that you make, the first and the last dollar. But after that, you pay nothing. There's a cap there. Nothing beyond that. So the most any person in this country pays in payroll taxes is $7,886.40. Mark Wahlberg last year made $68 million. He paid $7,886.40 in payroll taxes. You pay 6.2%. Mark Wahlberg's rate is 0.0116. I rounded that up, actually. It's 537 or something like that. That should make everybody feel, at least that's unfair, or maybe even a little bit angry, but I'm going to make you even angrier. People who make $174,000 a year pay 4.53% of their income in payroll taxes, while you pay 6.2%. Why does that make you angrier? Every rank and file member of the U.S. Congress makes $174,000 a year. They pay 4.53. You, your children, your grandchildren pay 6.2. So we need to eliminate that cap, period. That cap needs to disappear. So Mark Wahlberg, instead of spending less than $8,000 on payroll taxes, pays more than $4 million. Instead of helping 1/3 or 1/4 of a person in retirement, he helps 133 people in retirement. That would fix Social Security funding immediately. In fact, it would create a surplus. Well, we don't need a gigantic surplus because the government tends to borrow that money and spend it for other purposes. So that means we can bring the rate down for everybody. Let's say, for sake of argument, we could go down to 5%. If you make $50,000 a year, that difference is between giving up $3,300 a year and giving up $2,500 a year. That's $800 that you could spend in your local community supporting your local businesses. Okay? That means your rate would go down to 5%. The rate for members of Congress would go up to 5%. And any time that your taxes are going down and the taxes on members of Congress are going up, we're moving in the right direction. Now, let me get to income tax, and I'll get right to you, Carl, if that's all right. Everybody in the room here, of course, is familiar with the 7 brackets of our income tax system, right? You know exactly what the percentages are and what income bands are covered. And that's why you're all taking it to heart that the Republicans are saying they're going to simplify taxes by making it, 3 brackets, or maybe perhaps 4 brackets, since they've gotten in trouble with the idea of 3. You won't even notice, right? Even when you filled out paper forms, all that was hidden from you. You just knew what your taxable income was. They already did the math. 87.2% of Americans in 2015 did their taxes online. Nobody cares how many brackets there are. That's immaterial. As long as we have one less than infinity, any computer, your smartphone in your pocket can handle the various tax brackets. But the design of the tax brackets does matter. The first tax bracket comes in at currently comes in at 10%. There are 7 in total. The first one comes in at 10%, and then at 15%, and then 25%, and we have just reached the upper limit of middle class. It's a steep increase up to 25%. It never gets above 39.6 after that. In fact, the last increase starts at for a married couple, $470,700. That's it. That's the end. There are no more increases after that. So while if you're trying to get into and through middle class, for folks up in the top, they've got this nice plateau that just goes on forever and ever and ever. There are no increases at $1 million or $2 million or $5 million or $10 million. Mark Wahlberg, $68 million, just flat, flat, flat. They never pay 39.6% because mathematically that's impossible, as they're paying less than that percentage on some parts of their income. What we can do is reorganize the brackets, not the way the Republicans are doing it, because I promise you what they're looking at, their first bracket new bracket starts at 12%, not 10. They wanted to make the upper bracket 35, not 39.6. What they're doing is moving that slope more towards your end, making it steeper, and making that plateau longer and longer and longer. Okay? That's exactly the opposite of what should be happening. That experienced tax curve that starts steep and goes to a plateau should be a straight line that just continues on ad nauseum. So if that takes 12 brackets, if that takes 20 brackets, you should experience the same slope that Donald Trump experiences, the same slope that Mark Wahlberg experiences. They should experience the same slope that you experience.
I don't want to tell a long story, but I grew up relatively poor and somehow in my life managed to become a college professor. But the first half of my life, I was in working class jobs. Somewhere in my mid-50s, I got a paycheck either in late November or early December. and it was larger than all my other paychecks. I said, what? Why is that? Well, I had hit that cap.
Yeah.
Somebody had to tell me that I'd hit that cap. I'd never heard of that cap. I didn't know that if you make more money, all of a sudden you're not paying into Social Security anymore. You're not paying into Medicare. You're not getting those deductions out. I was like a little bit pleased that, that I had, you know, that check was bigger. But I was mad as hell, because I'm stupid, I guess, that I didn't even know that that cap existed. And I'll bet most working class people who never get near that cap have no idea that that cap exists.
You're right.
So I'm glad that you're talking about it.
And let me put a hopeful spin on this. And again, we'll close that revenue gap, and we'll reduce the deficit with those actions. I was with friends in late September. The wife works for Cisco, and I was talking about payroll taxes and talking about the cap and eliminating the cap, and she goes, "Oh yeah, Cisco pays pretty well." She goes, "You know, about September, October of the year, suddenly that disappears, and I've got my full paycheck. You know, I'm 6.2% per month is a sizable, noticeable gain." And so I explained to her very carefully and as lucidly as I could that I was going to take the cap away and raise her payroll taxes. And a few days later, I'm back in Carlisle, and I have an envelope from her, and inside was a check for $1,000 for the campaign. So people understand this.
Yeah.
They absolutely do understand this. You know, Warren Buffett and others they're outraged about this. We can fix this. Yeah. Well, our capitalist society, our free market, free enterprise system is designed and works beautifully to take money from the lowest levels on the economic ladder and channel it all the way up to the top. And if you don't do anything to affect it at all, then the money just accumulates up there, right? That's what it means to be a millionaire or billionaire. You just have accumulated tons and tons of wealth that you just can't distribute back into the economy. We have a mixed economy here. We don't have just a free market economy. We don't have a socialist economy. We use our government, and we've used it very successfully during the 20th century, to take money out of the top of that free market system and plug it back into the bottom. That created a virtuous cycle. That just kept money flowing and flowing and flowing through the economy. That made us the most powerful nation in the world in the 20th century. But the Republican strategy, their supply side, trickle-down strategy, is to squeeze that off. So instead of having a wheel that runs around continuously, we've got a flat tire. I keep telling everybody all around the district, some of you have heard this more times, Ginny, for example, more times than you can count. Standard Republican fare is huge tax cuts for the wealthy and pain and suffering for the rest of us. That's exactly what they're doing there. They cut off that tax for the wealthy, let them accumulate that money, plug nothing back into the bottom of the economy. We lose the flow of money through the economy, and that leads us to stagnation, slow growth, et cetera. Take the last, you can look at all the Republican tax cuts, but the last tax cut under George W. Bush lowered the rate for the wealthiest taxpayers from 39.6 to 35%. Immediately following that, for years, was less and less and less economic growth until we went into the Great Recession. While we're still in the Great Recession, under Barack Obama, we raised the taxes on the wealthy back up to 39.6%. We've had continued economic growth straight through till now. When we cut that tax off again and stop plugging that money back into the bottom of the economy, which is what Donald Trump and the Republicans are proposing, we're going to go back to a flat tire.
How do they ethically and morally justify their position to do that?
They don't. They don't. They don't. You know, what they say is they pretend that tax cuts for the wealthy are the means to an end. They're not. Tax cuts for the wealthy are the end. That's it. That's it. Mission accomplished. What follows after that doesn't matter. We've got tax cuts for the wealthy. The bigger question is, how do they keep getting elected, right? If you keep doing this, if standard Republican fare for 40 years now has been huge tax cuts for the wealthy and pain and suffering for the rest of us, how do you keep winning election? And they do that by demonizing government, right? They tell you government is not the solution, government is the problem. They tell you government's a beast that must be starved, and we starve it by denying it revenue, by cutting the taxes for the wealthy. They tell you that government can't do anything for you, government can only do things to you. Ronald Reagan said, right, the most terrifying words in the English language is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. The folks in Puerto Rico know the most terrifying words in the English language is, you're on your own. That's the terrifying part. So, but when they do this, when they create this story, and especially, you know, these government programs are helping immigrants, they're helping minorities, they're helping people not like you, whoever you are, then they start accumulating votes. But we can counter that. You can tell your Republican friends the simple truth. If you insist on voting for people who tell you that government cannot help you, government can only hurt you, when those people get in office, they'll prove it. They will prove it. Denny.
What do you feel about the military draft not being a part of our young people's, I guess, lack of education at home to be somewhat of a block builder for them for the future?
I've struggled with that a little bit because I don't quite have in my mind a solution for that. But there is a problem when nearly everyone who serves in the military comes from humble beginnings, right? That's what happened with me. After New York, the pride I had in my community when I was a teenager was it had over 1,000 people in it. So when you looked at a map atlas, there it was, Afton, 1,036 people. Hey, we're over 1,000. They have less than 900 now. There's no economic activity up there. So when an Air Force recruiter came and said, hey, would you like a job skill and get paid? It's like, I have no better option. And so off I went for 24 years. It would be great to get people from different backgrounds into the military. In the draft is probably the only way to do that, but I can't tell you what that would look like exactly. I do know that the Pentagon has just suggested that all women need to register for the draft now that women are in virtually every role that men are in the military. So that's a start, at least. We're not done. Yes?
To a lot of people, when they do, what you say, the more needy among us go into the service, is it because they're looking ahead to the GI Bill?
I hope they are. I hope they are.
Well, I would think.
Yeah, they're looking at that. I think they're probably looking at healthcare benefits, education benefits, et cetera. When I retired from the Air Force, the GI Bill was still just a monthly stipend, a small stipend. So I can give you an idea of how far it went. I went to a community college in the Panhandle of Florida, and I got about $4 every month for every dollar I spent on school. And then I got an invitation to go to American University. They gave me a President's Scholarship, $15,000 a year. For the other $15,000 a year, I was getting from the GI Bill about $1 for every $4 I was spending at American University. So that didn't go very far. But not long after that, they changed. And so I was living in Northern Virginia. I went to George Mason University. They paid every penny, and they paid me a $19,000 a year stipend to go to school. So if you have children or grandchildren who don't have any better prospects, and there aren't really, when you finally get in there and understand what's going on, there aren't many better prospects than being in the military. It's a wonderful experience. 2 decades overseas on taxpayer expense. Plug them in. I was in 24 years and 24 days, 2 decades overseas.
16 hours and 35 minutes.
They didn't break it down to that level, but it was something like that, I'm sure. But let's talk about the medical side, the healthcare side, because I'm kind of surprised we haven't talked about that yet. And you can go to the website again and read my positions on healthcare. But my wife and I have TRICARE Prime. We have this still because we had it in the military. We have it since we've left the military for almost 13 years now. 13 years. Because of the time that I served in the military. Our annual premium for the two of us is less than $600 a year. Last year, I got a little bit carved out of my ear, and I had a little bit carved out of my colon, 2 colonoscopies. I paid a handful of $12 copays, and I paid $0 for medication during that time. $0. So that's what we can do for Americans. It's not what we do, unfortunately.
So how do you feel about that? I mean, I know, if we're able to do that for our military personnel, for our veterans, and, we have veteran centers, my father goes to one, and we can do that somewhat efficiently, and I see the kinds of discounts that he gets for his medications. Why can't we do that across the board? Or something similar?
We absolutely can. My wife is Japanese. She just spent 13 months in Japan with her folks. Her mother turned 80 this year. Her father's 86. They go get health care all the time, routinely. They don't even think about it. Not just medical care, vision care, dental care as well. If you feel sick in Japan, you go get care, period. And so why are they outliving us? Well, there's a reason. I'm recommending 4 immediate changes with health care that will move us from where we are forward. And before I even get into that, let me ask you a favor. Please refer to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act as the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, okay? Republicans call it Obamacare when they want to remind their supporters that there was a black guy in the office in the White House. They call it the Affordable Care Act when they want to remind you that it's not free, although their programs are going to be more expensive and they're under their care, the programs are getting more expensive. They don't want to talk about patient protection. They absolutely don't want to talk about patient protection. Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is what we have to call it. So 4 things I'm recommending and again, you can go into this in the website. The first is adding a public option to all the healthcare exchanges. That will help hold down costs, and it will fill any gaps that Republicans want to point to about a county that has 1 or 0 providers on their exchanges. 2, lower the age for Medicare. And do that over the course of 3 years, just 1 year each year, 65 to 64 to 63 to 62. And pause so we can see how that's working out, see what lessons we've learned. Okay? Raise the poverty threshold for Medicaid. We're at 138% of poverty right now. Raise that over the course of 3 years to 150. Pause, see how that's doing. And then lastly, fully resource the VA so that we can get rid of the wait times, make sure that everybody gets the care that they need. And when we have accomplished that, take a look at increasing access to the VA to first responders. And I say that because I'm concerned about what happens with these small communities that are struggling to provide health care to their first responders or have volunteer fire departments that they can't recruit for. And if you've told potential recruits for a volunteer fire department that they would get health care access through the VA, maybe not even free, but at least reduce costs for that, then I think that would fill a hole there as well. All those 4 things move us from where we are, the number of people we have covered right now, towards a better outcome, a better situation, and they give us opportunities to look at those 4 initiatives and see which ones work best, which ones we want to spend more time on, which ones we want to focus on. Ultimately, years ago I read France had the world's best, most efficient healthcare system, and I was just reading the description. It was a public-private system that reminded me, and I think if you read it, would remind you of how we provide education here in the United States. Everybody gets access to public education. If that's not good enough for you, then we have a private system. You can go spend more money to get this private care system. We want to keep a private care system in part because there will be huge expenditures in that system that will drive cures and treatments that can benefit the public system. So we want to keep that going. So when I hear people talk about Medicare for all and no private system, that gives me pause. I don't think we want that. I think we want public care for everyone. We want a private system that will help us develop better techniques, better initiatives. Jerry.
I have a 2-part question. One has to do with what you were just talking about with healthcare. I agree with everything you said. How would you pay for it, first of all? And second, how would you allocate your resources among everything that the government spends? What would be your top priority and go down from there?
Well, we spend nationally a huge amount, of course, on healthcare. And so I don't know if that would be the #1 priority, but it would be the #1 focus for efficiencies and for savings and whatnot. Changes to the income tax brackets, changes to the income tax rates, et cetera, would help us fund those. If we are moving people from onto Medicare earlier and relieving the burden from large businesses, we want part of that money that they would have spent otherwise to come in and help support that. Likewise, if for industries, businesses that are paying poverty wages, essentially, if we're providing health care for those folks, then we want them to contribute as well. We don't need to go the full European route with tax rates, but the wealthy, Mark Wahlberg, I keep saying Mark Wahlberg so he shows up at an event someday. Mark Wahlberg can pay more. He really can pay more. Everybody saw Donald Trump's 2005 tax returns, right? The one instance we got, right? Alternative minimum tax meant he paid 30 million instead of 5 million. The Republican plan right now is to get rid of the alternative minimum tax so he can pay 5 million on $150 million worth of income. He only paid 20% to begin with. He doesn't need to pay 3. We can tax these folks more. We really can.
And they'd still be rich.
And they'd still be fine because that money is going from them, plugging right back into the bottom of the free enterprise system and working its way right back up to them, how they got it in the first place. Everybody, where does Mark Wahlberg get his money from? Come on, Wahlberg, let's see you. He gets his money from movie producers who get their money from the box offices, who get their money from you. That's all money you gave to them. They can contribute that money back to the society. I'll say, because I didn't mention this earlier, I'm concerned about some of the Medicare for All comments that are coming out. We pay nationally, over a decade, we pay $49 trillion in health care. Under the Medicare for All plan, they're saying, hey, we're only going to spend 32 trillion over a decade. That's a savings of 17 trillion. And obviously we could find some way to get that money since it's being spent anyways. The problem is that represents each year for 10 years an 8.5% reduction in economic activity in the United States. So we wouldn't just go into a recession, we would go into an economic depression. So we can't just suddenly turn a switch and go from 49 trillion a decade to 32 trillion a decade. We need to move deliberately, cautiously, or we'll do more harm than we'll do good. Just like the Republican plans as well, to just dramatically cut spending from the federal government, that pushes you towards recession.
Excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
What's your thoughts on early learning care, Head Start, pre-K count programs?
We need to fund those. We need to support those. Not just that. Across the whole spectrum of education.
And the salaries of the folks that work in early learning?
I have a lot of teacher friends and others, and they are horribly underpaid. I thought it was the worst until I attended a strike up in Kingston for healthcare workers that were starting out. They're taking care of mentally ill patients in a private hospital. Some of them are violently mentally ill. They start at $10.40 an hour for that. People packing your Christmas presents at an Amazon facility are making more. Yeah, we need to provide better education for everybody in this country. It needs to be cheaper. The teachers and staff need to be paid more, plain and simple. We used to have a great deal here that we would help students get through high school. They'd graduate as high school seniors. They had a path into the middle class in a lot of cases. That's gone away. You can't take your high school diploma and jump into the middle class anymore. You need more education, whether it's more college education, more vocational training, et cetera. The problem for us as a nation is we're investing this money up to this point and we're not getting a return like we used to get because we've got this gap. We need to close that gap so that we actually get a return. We need to educate people into the middle class so they're taxpayers and they're contributing back into the economy at all levels.
On the Medicare for All plan, do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea?
I think going from 49 trillion to 32 trillion is a hazardous idea. I think public care for everyone is the goal. We have to get there deliberately.
So that's what I guess Bernie is pushing right now.
And I've read different descriptions of his plan, including one that said there wouldn't be any private medical care in the United States, and that's a non-starter. The idea that everyone, just like my wife's parents and brother receive in Japan, if they need care, they go get care. That's the model that we should be going after.
When the government starts paying more, that means our taxes have to go up.
Right.
Such as the countries that have free healthcare, free education.
Right.
They pay a lot higher taxes than we do.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on what you mean by we.
Free in general.
Yep.
And our taxes, it depends.
What you have to compare is the taxes you're paying now and the premiums you're paying now with the taxes you would pay then. And what we have to do is make sure that the taxes you're paying then are less than what you're paying in premiums and taxes now. For everybody, no matter where you are in the economic ladder.
Penny and I lived in Canada under what they call social insurance, or they did at the time. And they do pay higher taxes up there, it's quite a bit more. I've never seen people that vacation more than the people up there. Somehow it comes out in the wash. Those people go on cruises, they go to Canada. They were vacationing more than we were because we were getting paid American. But really, it's not a bad plan. We happened to live there when they capped what the doctors could make, and they capped what the hours the doctors could work. And the doctors started fleeing. They came down to the States. They were going to North Carolina, quite a few down south. And I was talking to somebody recently who said that it was somebody that lives in Ontario, and her husband had had a heart problem, and she said, we couldn't have been better off. He had top care. We didn't have to pay but a pittance for the medications, and everything has worked out. We have a lot more doctors now. You know, they were fleeing because it was a change for them. They didn't want to see the change. The same as people are afraid to see the change in their taxes because it may end up with something bad. But how good are we? We're not that good well off now with the way it is, and I really don't feel that we'd be a whole lot worse off if our taxes went up a bit to cover the care so that everybody.
There are a lot of ways you can measure the quality of a healthcare system, but longevity is a good one, and the United States is not leading the globe in longevity. Another way you can measure the quality of a healthcare system is how much you spend, and we spend way more than other people, and again, we're not leading on longevity. I retired in the panhandle of Florida, and we'd see plates from Quebec and Ontario down there all the time, and I keep hearing this Republican story about Canadians flee to the United States for health care. No, they flee to the United States for beaches, and while they're there, they get health care because that's where they are. They're not driving from Florida back to Quebec to deal with a heart murmur. They're getting their heart treatment right then and there. When my wife went back for 13 months, she's an American citizen, traveling on an American passport. She goes in, she registers with the city office the day after she arrives so that she could get national health insurance and national health care there in Japan. And she's filling out the form, and she asks, so when does this start? Because, you know, sometimes you've got to have insurance for some period of time before it actually kicks in. They want a premium or two. Well, it starts now. She goes, how long have you been here? Well, I arrived yesterday. She goes, the one behind the counter says, well, technically it started yesterday when you arrived in the country. Bam, you're in our country, you're part of our healthcare system, we'll take care of you.
I have one other healthcare. Well, it's actually a concern. I called into healthcare.gov and I got everything straightened out. I'm set up for next year and no problem. One thing I am concerned with here in this country is, for instance, I'm on Silver Plan, I have Geisinger Plan, and one thing that I am concerned with is that HMOs, which they mostly put us people on, is they don't cover you when you travel.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a problem, but that's what we're offered as, you know, our healthcare.
Yeah. I don't have a solution for you. I'll tell you that even applies to me in TRICARE Prime. It's arranged in regions, and if I travel out of the region, then a different set of rules start to apply when I'm over there. It's we'll try to figure that out, but yeah, you're right. You should be able to, you're an American, you should be able to travel in the United States at the very least and get health care. Yes.
I had sort of a part two to my 11th district question.
Fire.
When Jerry was talking about gerrymandering.
And it's not his fault, because it's Eldridge Gary, and it was really gerrymandering to begin with, but yeah.
So I was just wondering, I'm assuming that 11th district, among others in the state of Pennsylvania, have been severely gerrymandered.
Yeah.
And how steep of a climb is it for you as a Democrat to be elected? Is it like a case of motivating registered Democrats? Is there like a kind of a large enough block of independents, that people that are kind of in the middle, that just like kind of need to get the word out there, or get, you know, give them some fake news?
How do we turn this blue? How do we get this one? Is that the gist? It depends a little bit on whose analysis you accept. All right. There's one that says 45.7% of the people in the 11th district are registered Republicans, 40.7% are registered Democrats. So that puts us 5 percentage points behind. But it leaves, over 15% of the population that are independents or something else. many of the people who are registered independents tend to be, not all of them by any stretch, but many tend to be low information voters. They're not just not Republican or not Democrat. They're not engaged, and they're staying out. So I don't know how many of those that we're actually going to get. I guess it was the Cook report that calls the district an R plus 10, saying they have a 10 percentage point disadvantage. But then we're looking at, like the scroll this morning, 71% of Republican voters and Republican-leaning voters are disenfranchised with Donald Trump, and they're looking for the Republican leaders to start standing up against him as well. The way we're approaching this is my campaign committee staff is working on Democratic voter turnout efforts, and you haven't seen a lot of that yet because we still have turnout to do this year, and every one of you and everyone you know needs to be out voting on Tuesday. But we start running the day after that, and I say running, we've been jogging for 6-7 months now. We start running, sprinting, beginning the day after that. They're going to focus on Democratic turnout, including the Democratic groups like millennials and others who tend not to vote. If you look around the room here, you'll see there's a slight bias in age in one direction or the other, and thank you all again for coming. So they're going to work on that. And the committee they're people like Jess here, they're of that age group. So they're talking to their peers and getting them out. I'm working on what I've described to them as the newspaper demographic, and literally people who read the newspaper, because they are educated, informed voters. They do turn out. Many of them are Republican. And we can start to peel them away from the Republican side if we just give them decent, respectful arguments that appeal to the reason, not to their emotions. We don't need every Republican, but if we can take just some small percentage of the Republicans off of that, that's -1 for them, and that's +1 for us. I was listening to MSNBC, not to reveal a media bias, but MSNBC about a month and a half ago, the Alabama primary, Senate primary was going on. And I couldn't see it, I was upstairs, I could hear the person they were interviewing, older male, white Republican, no question in my mind, and he was complaining and complaining and complaining that the candidates were just handing him these shiny cards with a picture of them with their dogs or with their family, with 6 words on them, maybe as many as 12 words, and that's it. And his complaint was, don't these people think we know how to read? Don't they think we will read? And so if you've seen my flyer, you see, which was printed months and months before that, where it's front and back with words on it, and we're going after these people with actual arguments, not, I've got nice enough dogs, I've got a nice enough family, but that's not how we're going to win this race. We're going to reason with these people and win these arguments. And that's why we're doing events like this. We've done our inaugural town hall. We're going to, with the beautiful PowerPoint slides that I protected you from today. And 4 of the first 6 are pictures of my dogs, honestly. To get out in the communities dozens and dozens and dozens of times between now and next November with the town halls and then hundreds of other events to actually talk to people, listen to people. The argument we're making is that if there's a representative who doesn't visit with you, who doesn't talk to you, who doesn't listen to you, that's not your representative. So I'm trying to be your best representative. Danny.
Alan, my earlier question concerning the military draft
Mm-hmm.
was really out of a deep concern for our youth that are coming along. Because so many of them, I remember back in the 60s, maybe it was started by President Kennedy, the Peace Corps, or some organization like that. You could defer that 2-year military commitment by going in and doing service work like that. But I don't think the youth that really have no hope for going to a college or don't have the financial means or those lines come out of school and do what? And that's the problem. We don't have anything for them to do the do what. And that's what I was trying to go back and say, hey, you got to give 2 years of your life to the military or as a substitute option, this, that, or whatever.
Yeah, and we have AmeriCorps and other groups that can do this, but they start out introduced by Democrats funded by Democrats, unfunded by Republicans, and that's kind of the risk, the problem we face. But we do have to provide, again, more education, more training opportunities, more involvement, as you're suggesting, et cetera, to close that gap so that we get a return on our investment. And it's not just, you know, that they pay taxes, but they become productive, happy people as well. So, you know, we have a distance to go there. We really do. I'll tell you that the military is not in love with the idea of bringing in a bunch of recruits who are not there because they want to be there and not there as volunteers, not willing to engage. We had, yeah, and my role as a non-commissioned officer in the military was to professionalize the force, and I was kicking people out of the Air Force, you know, left and right over the course of my time, because there are people who just did not belong in the military, and so that becomes a problem. But you're absolutely right. You know, if you work, I'm a public servant. I did it in the Air Force. I've been volunteering, and you've heard the bio. You can find it online as well. It speaks to me, and it speaks to everybody that I get involved with. People like doing good things for other people. We have to give them those opportunities. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of piggybacking on that too. I don't know where you stand or what we can do. We have more and more students going to college. The college costs just are skyrocketing. They're exorbitant. So then we're graduating people after 4 years who are having a hard time finding a job and are so far in debt. So, we want to help our young people, but we're graduating them with so much stress on their, they're carrying that weight on their shoulder that they've gotten an education and now they've got to pay it back and they can't find a job. So how do we stop these college costs from just going out of the roof?
The states and the federal government have both reduced their aid, right? You see it right here in Pennsylvania, for example. Saw it happening year after year after year in Virginia. And of course, when the state provides less and less tax support, then the tuition at the public schools goes up. And when the tuition at the public schools go up, tuition at the private schools keeps pace, right? If you can hold tuition down at the public schools, the private schools have to keep things in check. And of course, as the tuition goes up, you're exactly right. Then you get huge increases in student debt. And now with this new tax plan, they're not going to be able to declare the interest on that debt as well. So we've just made a bad problem even worse. Yeah, we have to, I don't know that we have to provide free 4-year college educations to everybody who's willing to do that, but we do need to make it much cheaper in the public schools so that private schools will follow suit. We absolutely have to do that. I told you I went to school at George Mason. I was living in Northern Virginia. The folks who were on the team with me at USIP, the Sense team, largely were either master's degree students or master's degree graduates, some of them pursuing PhDs. 1 in 10 were working in their intended role, just some people can relate, because there's so much competition there that they just can't do that. So people with master's degrees and $150,000 worth of debt, tending tables at night, tending bar in the weekends, et cetera, trying to break into their career field in a very, very competitive area, and dealing with, just watching that debt just grow and grow and grow and grow.
Right, and then dealing with that stress and dealing with not being able to get affordable health care, and then their health begins to go downhill. So it's just like a vicious circle.
At a minimum, we could provide federal loans and make the interest rate just enough to cover loan defaults and administration, and nothing more than that, not 6%, 7%, 8% like we see some people suffering through. Carl.
My understanding is that when you run in the primary, right now there are maybe three people you're running against. Is that true?
There's one other Democrat. There are 4 Republicans right now that I'm aware of.
Forget the Republicans.
Oh. Sure.
Well, I'm not talking.
Easy.
My question
Done.
is not about that.
As I said, yeah. One Democrat that I'm aware of right now.
There's another guy,
Right.
Denny Wolf from Millville, is that
Correct.
correct?
Right.
Aside from the fact that every single time I've been at some kind of a rally in the last, let's say, 5 or 6 months, you've been there.
Yeah.
Aside from the fact that you're clearly a good public speaker with a grasp of a wide range of issues.
And I have a campaign song.
Aside from the fact that you are literally the only political candidate in my life that I've ever put a bumper sticker on my car. And aside from the fact that you have a good enough set of dogs and family, why should people vote for you and not whoever that other fellow is?
I think they should vote for themselves. Vote for yourselves. You can go to the website, you can follow me on Facebook, you can see what we're doing, but I think you'll see that what I'm doing for you.
Why did you come to Pennsylvania? Why did you leave Virginia and other places that you lived?
Well, thank you for that. And as you heard, I grew up in Afton, New York, which is 25 miles east-northeast of Binghamton. So when I'm in Wilkes-Barre, I'm closer to where I grew up than where I live in Carlisle. I'm in Carlisle now because when I was 15 years old as a fly fisherman, I got a book by Vincent Marinero called In the Ring of the Rise, which is about the Letort Spring Run that runs through Carlisle. So when I'd been in the Air Force long enough to think about retirement, I started thinking about, where would this go? And Carlisle started at the top of the list. Carlisle didn't budge from the top of the list. And this is after, again, 2 decades of overseas service. I was in Japan for 5.5 years, South Korea for a year, Japan for 5 more, Northern Italy for 5 years, which is absolutely wonderful. Then a couple years in Arlington, where I finally got to spend some time in Carlisle and check that out and say, hey, this is everything we imagined it might be. An oasis in the middle of the Appalachians with the War College and Dickinson College and the law school there. Lots of diversity, lots of integration. The community just passed last fall a human relations ordinance that provides protections for the LGBTQ community that the state won't provide. So it was just an absolute wonderful fit for us. I love the people who live there forever, and they constantly tell me what a great area Carlisle is, and I tell them my rebuttal is, I've been all around the world. I know how great Carlisle is. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I understand we want to, in Pennsylvania, to eliminate the property tax. What do you think about that? What would be the consequences of it?
It's exactly that we don't know what the consequences are going to be, that everybody should really vote no for this, because this is not the end. This is one step in a process, and nobody will tell us what steps 2, 3, or 4 are. I have one of our Democratic county commissioners in Cumberland County tells us that, you can vote yes or no, it's really not going to matter because nothing will happen with this. Okay, you can eliminate the property tax. There's no authority for the municipalities to provide any other kind of tax to replace that revenue, and so the effect will be nothing. But I think there's a chance for mischief down the line where they do provide authorities later for other types of taxes, and it ends up, if you have a $2 million property and the local municipality has the opportunity to cut your taxes to 0%, then you might want to influence those local politicians to do that. So I think this opens up an opportunity for bad things to happen in the future.
Because my question is, for the moment, our taxes pay for the school.
They do.
So
and municipal government.
How will the school be paid?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And right now, the current, as I understand it, the current amendment is for municipal governments to make those changes. But again, there's no replacement for that revenue. There will be some replacements to those revenues coming out of the General Assembly at some point in time. I'd prefer to know what those are before I jumped on this other change. Danny?
I didn't have them written down, honestly.
No, that's good. Well, we never see each other, so let's.
You drive right by my house. The president has openly made the statement that, he doesn't really like what the Justice Department is doing, doesn't like the FBI, thinks that he ought to be, have much more of a say in what they do and how they do it, and we all know that that's not what we are as a republic. But how close do you think his thinking is of being a fascist-minded president?
At the very least authoritarian, but really there are strong parallels to what we've seen in fascist governments in the past. We know he admires the president of the Philippines and of Turkey, and we know he loves Vladimir Putin, and he wishes he had all the authority that Vladimir Putin has, and so I encourage him to go to Russia and give it a shot.
I'll try
That's not what we do here. The thing that alarmed me most, right, is he wrote this angry string of tweets one morning and then ended the last one with what seemed to me clearly to be an appeal to his followers, all caps, do something. What exactly is he talking about, do something? You know, he mentioned during the campaign that, you know, maybe those Second Amendment types would fix something. I don't know who he's calling to with that exactly. He's not calling to me or you, because we're not going to, if we're going to do something, it's going to be jump up and down on top of him with, you know, holding hands with Robert Mueller. But yeah, that alarms me. That his instincts on every issue like this are exactly wrong, exactly authoritarian, exactly undemocratic. I've been telling people in other talks that the Republican strategy to win the White House last year was first I would tell them an undemocratic, un-American, and then I would correct myself and say an anti-democratic, anti-American strategy of 3 pillars: gerrymandering, voter suppression, and partnering with the Russians. And that's wildly inappropriate. This year they're counting on something else. This year they're counting on voter turnout to be their strategy. Right? They're counting on you guys to surrender, counting on you to forfeit the election, counting on you to stay home. You must not do that. You must win this election.
Amen.
Yes, ma'am.
So I really love that you put all these issues on here, because I'm really horrified that we have become a nation that doesn't listen to each other, even when sometimes listening is extremely difficult. And I really do believe that if we're going to elect you, we're going to elect you by sitting down with people who don't agree with us and listening and talking. There's no way I'm going to sit down with a lot of the people I work with and not know where you stand on an issue that I wish wasn't an issue in this country.
Okay.
And that's guns.
Okay. Yep.
That's not on this list.
Yep. I'm pretty sure it is on the website as well. You can see we filled the page, and so there were guns and a couple other things. We just had to truncate and knock off. So I was raised a hunter. I used to have built into the town hall 4 topics that people could ask me to go into after I went through my spiel on strong communities, strong nation. And one of them was titled, "That Time They Confiscated My Guns." Okay. So 2 of my deer hunting rifles and a shotgun were at my father's house while I was traveling all around the world in the Air Force. It's just not practical. You know, our first assignment was Japan. I'm not taking guns to Japan. That's absolutely not going to happen. So I left everything there. And right before I retired from the Air Force, maybe in fact while I was in the Gulf helping plan and start the Iraq War, which is we can talk about that as well if you want. All my father's guns, everyone, all of his rifles, shotguns, pistols, revolvers, everything was taken away and sold. And my rifles and shotguns were taken away with that. And the reason that happened is because my father was sliding deeper and deeper and deeper into dementia. And my brother, who lived across the road, and the other neighbors in the area weren't comfortable living next to somebody who had a deer hunting arsenal, but an arsenal nonetheless. You know, somebody who's losing his mental capacity to deal rationally with what's going on here. So I tell my fellow gun owners a few points. One, they make up just 30% of the voting public. So they need the cooperation, at least the acceptance of the other 70%. When I was in the Air Force, as I mentioned, I worked on professionalizing the Air Force. The police departments around the country are dealing with a professionalizing issue right now. Most of the police officers are wonderful people, but they get a few people in there that should never be cops and should never have a weapon, etc. They need to keep them out. The gun community needs to professionalize itself as well. Okay? That means, first and foremost, keeping people who are mentally ill, keeping spouse abusers, keeping terrorists away from guns. So we know that the majority of Americans are in favor of universal background checks. The majority of gun owners are in favor of universal background checks. The majority of NRA members are in favor of universal background checks. Only Wayne LaPierre and Republicans in the House and Senate are against that, and that's why we don't have them yet. We need that to professionalize the gun-owning community so that people who should not have guns do not get access to guns, and we keep them separated from that. That's something we reasonably can do to make our community safer. I don't know that we can go beyond that. I'm willing to look at other ideas, but that's the one thing we absolutely can do to protect ourselves, keep ourselves safe.
Who makes the decision if they're capable or not?
Well, I think that's probably a doctor's decision and a judge's decision, but not in all cases. You might recall that President Obama prohibited 75,000 people on Social Security disability from having access to guns. He put them on the list, the background list. These are 75,000 people whose mental capacity is diminished to the point that they need assistance to access their disability payments. They can't do it on their own. So Barack Obama put them on the background check list. Do not sell new guns to these people in public sales. He can't prevent private sales. He didn't take their weapons away. He just said, do not sell these 75,000 people new guns.
But who makes the decision to if somebody's capable? Anybody could say, you're not capable. You know what I mean? Who makes that decision?
Well, to get on that list is a process, right? Judges put people on that list primarily right now. It's spouse abusers, felons, et cetera, who are on that list right now. So I expect the process to go much the same way.
There's a lot of questions about that.
Well, there are. You know, we had questions about if you're on the do not fly list, should your name be on the background list, right? The background check list. And my answer is yes, for two reasons. One, because you have aroused a certain amount of suspicion in your behavior that has been considered by competent authorities. And two, if you're on the do not fly list, generally you're not going to know that until you actually try to fly. Well, here's an alternative way where you might find out that you're on the do not fly list. You try to purchase a weapon and find out that you are rightly or wrongly on that list, and then you can go about getting yourself removed. And again, a judge intervenes in that case. It's not a perfect system. This is not going to end all the mass shootings we've had, but the gun community, the gun owning community needs to show some responsibility for what's going on, some level of compromise, and this is a simple, easy thing to do. And background checks work. Tens of thousands of people in this country every year are denied the purchase of weapons because they are on those lists. Felons, not all felons are wise, felons go into gun shops and try to purchase weapons they're not permitted to have, and they get stopped. These things work, but all the private sales, many gun show sales, completely removed from that process. Denny.
Do you think that the way that a president gets voted to win an election is going to be challenged on the electoral college system versus popular vote? Do you think any of that's going to become an issue?
I doubt it. I doubt it. I don't want to sound like a conservative, but let me tell you, philosophically, I hate change. Change is expensive. Change is disruptive. Change is tough. I do love improvement. And so if you tell me that we're going to make a change and things are going to get better, then I'm willing to do that. I don't know that change makes the country better than it was. There are great arguments, of course, for the popular vote, one of them being Donald Trump is in the White House today. You can't, how can you top that for an argument? But we have the system we have because the small states were very, very concerned that they would be just completely meaningless. All of them would be flyover country, and we shouldn't have flyover country in this nation. They should all play a role. We can't have Texas, New York, Florida, and California deciding who's going to be the president year after year after year after year. Yes, ma'am.
As a nation, we are extremely polarized in our politics. We are the Democrats, they are the Republicans. How do you see yourself in Congress working to be able to breach that divide so that you can effectuate your positions?
And of course, in Congress, Dr. Bill Freeman again pointed out the Hastert rule to me yesterday and how that has affected what the Republicans are doing. But with Republicans in charge, we're seeing this in a way that we've never seen it before. They can't get anything passed because, if you need 50 votes and the vice president in the Senate and you're only working with 52 people, you've got to convince everybody. Whereas, take for example, you're familiar with immigration reform that was passed a few years ago in the Senate with about 72 or 76 votes. if they had brought that up for a vote in the House, it would have passed with Democratic and Republican votes. And the answer to your more specific question, answer to your question is that I'll work with anybody who wants to do the right thing for the people in the 11th District, who want to do the right things for our country, and people who are doing things that are not good for you and not good for the country. If I can't bend them towards doing the right thing, then I'm not going to work with them. I was kind of excited that I was going to be in the House working with somebody like Charlie Dent, because Charlie Dent seemed like a Republican that at least on some issues you could work with. Charlie Dent's decided he can't work with Republicans either, and so he's out. So who knows what will be there. I don't think, when we turn the House blue next year, I don't think Democrats are going to operate the way Republicans have. As tempting as that is, I don't think they're going to operate that way. They didn't with the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. They had hearing after hearing after hearing after hearing. Chuck Grassley was in the news on the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act day after day after day after day. I think you'll see more of that going on. I really do. There's no reason we need to have just Democratic votes for these things. We can have Democratic votes and some Republican votes, and that's better for everybody, really. Jerry.
Are you familiar, and what's your opinion of no labels? Do you think that is a good way to collaborate? And are they working? Is it working?
I haven't heard much from them in a while now, so my tendency is to think that they're not working. You could divide the nation into 3 or 4 or 5 political parties if you want. I think it gets much harder for the will of the people to be expressed that way. When we're in this bifurcated system with 2 major parties, you have the opportunity to switch the White House from Democrat to Republican, Republican to Democrat. You can do the same in the House and Senate and shift course if you're unhappy with where things are going. If you had 5 political parties, competing for power in the House, I think it would be harder for people to express a demand on the federal government to move in one direction or the other. I think there's something good in going into a voting booth and having to pick the guy on the right or the gal on the left, for example. Have we clocked out? All right, good. But we might have exhausted our... Yeah, we got one more, sorry.
Alan, when you become the Democratic candidate for the 11th district and the whole debate takes on a new level and level of intensity, how do you think you handle the attacks that will come at you? And they'll come at you personally, as we see it every day. Yeah. How will you hold up?
You're familiar with Facebook, of course, right? So let me tell you about my Facebook experience, because I grew up again in that small town in upstate New York, and I was an enlisted member in the Air Force, and so I've got a lot of former high school classmates on my Facebook personal page and a lot of former Air Force colleagues, and they're very, 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 very Republican in many cases. And so there's seldom a day that goes by when I don't get some kind of insult from somebody I used to sit in a desk next to or worked in an office with, et cetera. And I'm immune to that. That just rolls off. Let's get on to the issue at hand and get this fixed. There's a guy I went to high school with who runs around a very, very, very right-wing websites. And whenever there's some kind of horribly nasty attack on Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, and I mean, they're still happening today, of course, he highlights my account in that and says, this is the future with Alan Howe in Congress. And I don't contest that at all, because he's going out to this universe of people who have no idea who I am and advertising me. And when they go back to my Facebook page, the personal page, they read political posts after political posts that don't reflect what he's saying. So have at it. That's fine. I don't care. There are issues that are important to the 11th district in the nation. That's all that matters. That's all that matters.
I don't have a question so much as a kind of a comment about something that bothered me about Donald Trump. Well, I'm speaking specifically to you because you were a military person for a long time. Yeah. After Charlottesville,
Mhm.
the guy in some ways defended Nazis. In some ways, he defended the, let's call them the great-grandchildren of the Confederacy, you know, white supremacists,
Yep.
right? So let's look at our history for a second. Right? We've had a number of wars. Which two wars killed the most American United States service people? The biggest one was the Civil War by far,
Yep.
right?
Right.
So he defends that. The second biggest one was World War II. And who were we fighting in World War II? The Nazis. And he defends that. This man should not be the President of the United States. President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, can't be somebody who isn't even smart enough to defend the service people that serve under him.
You
He can't be the President of the United States.
you have no argument for me. This is a guy, you heard the mention of my leading tours of civil rights historical sites in Montgomery, Alabama. I've been a student of the civil rights movement for the longest time because it's such a great embodiment of American ideals and what democracy can do here in this nation. I love it, absolutely love it. Donald Trump began with racism. Donald Trump continues with racism right through to today. Right through today. And I'll give you one example, and then, is that clock right? Maybe we have.
That's a little fast.
Okay. We're right at the end? All right, good. So I'll wrap up after
It's right
this.
on the minutes, wrong on the hour.
Okay. Thank goodness. Donald Trump was trying to start World War III with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. You might remember that, right? That was in the news day after day after day after day, saber rattling and name calling and insults, just utter nonsense. And it kept going until Donald Trump was suddenly distracted by black NFL players and a black Gold Star family. And that was it. We haven't heard boo from him on that topic anymore because there were black people stealing the spotlight from Donald Trump. And I don't think you need to know much more about him than that right there. I really don't. I'm sorry. That's exactly the sequence of events. Okay, how can you help me? There are 1,000 ways, and I hope you've thought of all of them at this point. But one of the things you can do is go to howeforpa11.org or .com, your pick. There's a volunteer button on there. Punch that volunteer button and give us your information. There's a subscribe button. Punch that in as well. If you're volunteering, tell us what you specifically would like to do if you can. Tell us when you're available. Put it right there in the comments. I can only work from April 4th to April 7th. We'll find a role for you during that time. We need lots of volunteers in the northern end of the district here. We're trying to get an associated committee to partner with our committee down in the Carlisle area so that we can get town halls scheduled, breakfast, lunch, dinner, coffee, beer with a candidate event scheduled, et cetera, so that we can, again, have that face-to-face interaction with people. There's also, I think you'll find it, it's kind of prominent, there's a donate button on that website as well. And if you ever think you're going to donate to a political campaign, mine or any others, the best time to do it is right now. So that if you decide you want to do it again, you've got time to do it again. But it's also, here's how this works, right? We're trying to do this as inexpensively and personally as we can with the face-to-face interactions, much cheaper than throwing that colorful mail that gentleman from Alabama didn't like. But those things still cost a little bit of money, and the support we'll get from the DCCC and from national contributors, et cetera, is going to hinge on how much money they see us raising early in the campaign. If we show that we're catching fire, that you like us and like what we're doing, then they will join in and contribute as well, and then it'll be easier on all of us. Again, we're going to win. We're absolutely going to get. We've already driven Lou Barletta out of the race. That's why he's going. That's why he's running against Bob Casey. Let me support that just a little bit. We've been talking about town halls from the very beginning. Lou Barletta hasn't done a town hall since 2011. Okay. Steve Scalise was shot at a baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia. Lou Barletta made a public comment saying, no one should hold town halls because it endangers the audience. And so we immediately went out and said, well, that's kind of self-serving, Lou. And by the way, that was baseball practice, not a town hall. We're still doing town halls. We're doing our next town hall November 14th in Hazleton, the evening that some of our friends in the Columbia County Democratic Committee and Columbia County Indivisible will be out there protesting that Lou Barletta doesn't hold any town halls. So that works pretty well for us. So it's easier for Lou Barletta to explain why he lost to Bob Casey statewide, where the Democrats have a registration advantage, than to explain how he lost the 11th district to me. But he would have lost the 11th district to me. So are the Republicans, because of you, because of your help. We turn this district blue, Tom Wolf can't lose, Bob Casey can't lose. We turn this district blue, Lou Barletta, Scott Wagner cannot win, okay? Let's do it. Thank you.